My name is Haley Carter. I am 31 years old from Austin, Texas. What would you do if the people you trusted most spent decades pretending, just to cash in on someone's death? Have you ever sat in a room full of family, knowing something felt off, but you couldn't prove it? And what if, after 20 years of waiting, planning, and quietly counting someone else's money, everything collapsed in seconds? Imagine a lawyer opening a letter that doesn't just divide wealth, but reveals secrets, exposes intentions, and humiliates the very people who thought they had won. Would you feel shocked or secretly satisfied knowing karma finally showed up right on time? Let me tell you something, kids notice more than adults think. Maybe not right away, maybe not in a way they can explain, but they feel it. And growing up in my house, I always felt this strange, uncomfortable difference whenever Grandpa was involved. On the surface, everything looked perfect. Every Sunday, my mom would remind my dad, "Call him, don't forget." And suddenly my dad's voice would change, softer, warmer. Like he was a completely different person. "Hey, Dad. Just wanted to check in, see how you're doing." He'd laugh a little too much, ask questions he never really cared about, and end the call with, "Love you." But the second he hung up, silence. Then came the real conversation. "How much do you think the house is worth now? He still hasn't updated the will, right? We need to visit more often." It matters. I didn't understand it back then. I thought, maybe this is just how adults talk, maybe money is just part of life, but something about it didn't feel right. Because the version of my parents I saw on those calls didn't match the people sitting at the dinner table afterward. And then there were the visits. Oh, those visits were performances. We'd drive hours to see Grandpa, and my mom would rehearse things in the car like it was a script. Be respectful, be loving. Stay close to him. My dad would bring gifts, expensive ones, but I noticed something strange. He never put that kind of effort into anyone else. Not even me, sometimes. The moment we walked through Grandpa's door, it was like stepping onto a stage. Smiles, hugs, compliments. "Dad, you look great. We missed you so much." And Grandpa, he believed it. Or at least, I think he wanted to. But I started paying attention to the small things, like how my mom would subtly look around the house, scanning, calculating. Or how my dad would ask questions that didn't sound emotional, they sounded strategic. Have you thought about downsizing? Managing all this must be expensive, right? Even as a teenager, I remember thinking, this doesn't sound like concern, this sounds like planning. And here's the part that really stayed with me. The second we got back in the car after visiting him, everything changed again. My mom would exhale like she had just finished a long shift. "That went well," she'd say. My dad would nod. "Yeah, we need to keep this up." Keep what up? That question sat in my mind for years. Because love isn't something you keep up. It's something you feel. As I got older, the pattern became impossible to ignore. Birthdays weren't about Grandpa, they were about showing up. Holidays weren't about family, they were about appearances. Every interaction had this invisible layer beneath it, like there was always something to gain. And the craziest part? They thought I didn't see it, but I did. I saw how their tone changed. I saw how their priorities shifted. I saw how every kind gesture had a hidden purpose. And slowly, my perception of them started to change. Because when you realize your parents are capable of pretending for that long, of putting on a mask for 20 years, it does something to you. It makes you question everything. Were they ever genuine? Was any of it real? Or was it all just part of the plan? I stopped joining those calls. I stopped engaging in those visits the same way. Not out of rebellion, but because I couldn't fake what they were faking. It felt wrong, heavy, like I was being pulled into something I didn't believe in, and deep down I think Grandpa knew. Because sometimes, when no one else was looking, he'd give me this quiet smile. Not the kind you give a crowd, but the kind you give someone you understand. Like he could see right through everything, and he knew I wasn't part of it. That's when I realized something important. While my parents were busy maintaining an image for 20 years, they forgot one thing: someone was always watching. And it wasn't just me. Let me tell you, there's a difference between grief and anticipation. And that day, I saw both, but not in the way you'd expect. The morning Grandpa passed, the house didn't feel like a place of mourning. It felt tense, quiet but not sad. Like everyone was holding their breath, waiting for something bigger than the loss itself. My mom got the call first. I remember watching her face as she listened. There was a pause, a slow nod, and then she said, "Okay, we'll be there." She hung up, turned to my dad, and for a split second, just a second, I saw it. Not heartbreak, something else. Something closer to relief. "We should leave now," she said quickly. No tears, no silence, just urgency. The drive to Grandpa's house was different from every other visit. No rehearsed lines this time, no reminders to act right, just quiet whispers between my parents that they thought I couldn't hear. This is it. Everything should be in place. He wouldn't change it after all these years. I sat in the backseat, staring out the window, feeling this strange heaviness in my chest. Because even in that moment, I wasn't thinking about money, I was thinking about him, his laugh, his stories, the way he used to sneak me candy when my parents weren't looking. But in that car, it felt like I was the only one remembering him as a person. When we arrived, the house was already filling up. Relatives I hadn't seen in years were suddenly everywhere, talking in hushed voices, exchanging looks, forming little groups in corners like they were all part of some unspoken agreement. But it didn't feel like a family gathering. It felt like a waiting room, and everyone was waiting for the same thing. I watched my parents closely that day. The way they moved, the way they spoke, it was subtle, but it was there. This quiet confidence, like they had already won something that hadn't even been announced yet. My mom walked through the house like she belonged there, touching furniture, straightening things that didn't need straightening. My dad kept checking his phone, pacing, occasionally stepping outside to take calls. At one point, I overheard him say, "Yeah, it should go smoothly. We've been there for him the most." Been there for him, that phrase hit me harder than anything else, because I knew what being there really looked like. I had seen it. And it didn't match the story he was telling. As more relatives arrived, the atmosphere shifted even more. Conversations weren't about memories, they were about assumptions. I wonder how he divided everything. He always favored them, you know. Well, we'll find out soon enough. No one said it directly, but it was in the air. This wasn't just about loss anymore. This was about expectation. And my parents, they were at the center of it. They greeted people with polite sadness, but there was something underneath it, a kind of control. Like they were managing not just their emotions, but the entire situation. At one point, my mom pulled me aside and said, "Stay close today, this is important." Important. That word didn't sit right with me, because if this day was really about Grandpa, the word wouldn't be important. It would be heartbreaking. As the hours passed, I noticed something else. No one was crying, not really. There were a few forced tears here and there, a few dramatic sighs, but nothing real, nothing that came from deep within. It was like everyone was playing a role, waiting for the next act to begin. And then I realized something that made my stomach drop. This day, the one they had all claimed to fear, was actually the day they had been preparing for. For years, especially my parents, every visit, every call, every carefully chosen word, it all led to this moment. And now that it was finally here, they weren't lost, they were ready. Too ready. I stood there in the middle of that house, surrounded by people who shared my blood. But in that moment, I felt completely alone. Because I wasn't thinking about what I might get, I was thinking about what we had already lost. And the worst part, I had this feeling. This quiet, persistent feeling in the back of my mind, that something wasn't going to go the way they expected. Because when people spend 20 years building expectations around something as unpredictable as life, they forget one thing: they're not the ones in control. Let me tell you something, rooms can change in seconds. One moment, everything feels controlled, predictable. And the next, one sentence can flip the entire atmosphere upside down. That's exactly what happened when the lawyer walked in. Up until that point, the house was full of quiet tension. People whispering, watching each other, pretending to grieve while mentally calculating outcomes. But the moment he stepped through the door, briefcase in hand, expression unreadable, everything went still. This was it, the moment everyone had been waiting for. We all gathered in the living room. Chairs filled quickly, and the rest of us stood along the walls. I stayed near the back, close enough to hear, but far enough to observe. Because at that point, I wasn't just part of the family anymore, I was watching them. My parents sat front and center. Of course they did. My mom had her hands folded neatly in her lap, her posture perfect. My dad leaned slightly forward, eyes locked on the lawyer like he was about to hear the results of a lifelong investment. And in a way, he was. The lawyer introduced himself calmly, offering brief condolences. No one really responded, not because they were too emotional, but because they were too focused. Then he opened the briefcase. That small sound, the click of the lock, echoed louder than it should have, or maybe it just felt that way because everyone was holding their breath. He pulled out a single envelope, not a stack of documents, not multiple pages, just one, and that's when I felt it, that shift. Something about that envelope didn't match the expectations in the room. It was too simple, too deliberate. "This," the lawyer said, holding it up slightly, "is a personal letter your father asked me to read aloud before anything else." Before anything else. I saw my mom's expression flicker for just a second. Confusion. My dad straightened in his seat like he was trying to process what that meant, because this wasn't how they imagined it. There was supposed to be a breakdown, assets, percentages, clear outcomes, not a letter. The lawyer opened it carefully, unfolded the paper, and began to read. At first, it sounded normal. A greeting, a reflection, a few words about family, but then the tone changed. "I have spent many years observing, not just what you say, but what you do." That sentence landed heavy. I felt it in the room, the air shifted, people adjusted in their seats. Some exchanged quick glances, and then he continued. "I've seen kindness, but I've also seen intention. I've heard words of love, but I've learned to listen to what's behind them." My heart started beating faster, because suddenly, this didn't feel like a will anymore. This felt like a confrontation. I looked at my parents. That confidence they walked in with, it was starting to crack. My mom's hands tightened slightly in her lap, my dad's jaw clenched. Not dramatically, but enough for me to notice. The lawyer kept reading. He mentioned visits, calls, efforts that seemed generous on the surface, but carried a different weight over time. He didn't accuse directly, but he didn't need to, because everyone in that room knew exactly what he was talking about. And then came the part that changed everything. "I have come to understand that not all presence is genuine, and not all absence is neglect." Silence, complete silence, no whispers, no movement, nothing, because that line. It cut through every assumption that had been built over the last 20 years. My parents had always believed they were present, that their consistency, no matter the intention, would secure their place. But now, that belief was being dismantled, word by word. I saw my mom blink rapidly, like she was trying to process what she was hearing. My dad shifted in his seat, his confidence turning into something else, uncertainty. And for the first time that day, they didn't look prepared. The lawyer paused for a moment, then continued. "This letter is not about money, it is about truth." That sentence hit harder than anything before it. Because in that moment, it became clear, whatever came next wasn't going to follow the plan they had spent 20 years building. This wasn't a transaction. This was a revelation. And as the lawyer took a breath to continue reading, I realized something that sent a chill down my spine. Grandpa hadn't just left behind an inheritance. He had left behind a message. One that was about to expose everything they thought they had hidden, and there was no way to stop it now. Let me tell you, there's a kind of silence that feels louder than shouting. The kind that presses against your chest, makes your ears ring, and freezes everyone in place. That's the silence that filled the room as the lawyer continued reading. No one moved. No one interrupted, because deep down everyone knew this wasn't just a letter anymore. This was exposure. The lawyer's voice stayed calm, steady, almost too neutral for what he was saying. And maybe that made it worse, because every word landed clean, sharp, undeniable. I believe that true character is revealed not in moments of gain, but in moments where nothing is expected in return. I felt my stomach tighten, because I knew exactly where this was going. And so did my parents. I looked at them again. My mom's posture, the one she had carefully maintained earlier, was starting to collapse. Her shoulders sank just slightly, like the weight of the words was physically pressing down on her. My dad, who had been leaning forward with confidence before, was now sitting back, stiff, his arms crossed like he was trying to shield himself from what was coming. But there was no shielding from this. I have seen who comes with open hearts and who comes with open hands. That line, it didn't just land, it echoed. And suddenly, the room didn't feel neutral anymore. It felt divided. Eyes began to shift. People who had been staring at the floor now glanced sideways at my parents. No one said anything. But everything was being said, because everyone remembered the visits, the phone calls, the carefully timed appearances. Things that once looked like effort now looked like strategy. And then came the part that broke them. The lawyer paused, just for a second before continuing. Some of you have mistaken consistency for sincerity. My mom let out the smallest breath, barely audible, but I heard it. It wasn't relief. It wasn't sadness. It was panic, real panic. My dad's jaw tightened even more, his eyes fixed on the floor now. He wasn't looking at the lawyer anymore. He wasn't looking at anyone. Because when the truth starts unfolding in front of a room full of people, eye contact becomes impossible. The lawyer continued, his tone unchanged. I will not reward actions that were performed with expectation rather than love. And just like that, everything my parents had built for 20 years collapsed, not with noise, not with drama. But with clarity. I could feel it in the room, that shift, that realization spreading from person to person like a quiet wave. No one needed to ask questions. No one needed clarification. The message was clear. They weren't just losing money. They were losing face. I glanced around and saw it, the reactions they couldn't control. A cousin raising their eyebrows slightly. An aunt pressing her lips together. Someone in the corner slowly shaking their head, not in shock, in recognition, because this wasn't coming out of nowhere. This was confirmation. And that's what made it so brutal. If it had been unexpected, maybe my parents could have defended themselves, denied it, argued, created doubt, but this was something everyone had quietly noticed, but never said out loud. Until now, and the worst part, it wasn't coming from the family, it was coming from him. From the one person they had tried so hard to convince. My mom finally looked up, her eyes darting around the room, but not in defiance, in fear. Like she was searching for someone, anyone to disagree, to interrupt, to say this wasn't fair. But no one did. No one moved. Because truth has a way of silencing people, not because they're unsure, but because they're certain. My dad shifted again, running a hand over his face, his composure slipping with every second. The man who walked into that room believing he had already won now looked like he was trying to disappear, and I realized something in that moment. This wasn't just humiliation. This was exposure at the deepest level, because money can be lost and earned again, but reputation, respect. Once those are stripped away in front of everyone, there's no getting them back the same way. The lawyer folded the letter slightly, preparing to continue, and I could feel the tension building again. Because if this was already happening, then whatever came next, it was going to finish what had just begun. And my parents, they weren't ready, not for this. Not for the truth being laid out, piece by piece, in a room where there was nowhere left to hide. Let me tell you, just when you think a moment can't get any heavier, life has a way of proving you wrong. The room was already suffocating. Everything that needed to be said about my parents had been said, clearly, publicly, and in a way that couldn't be undone. Their silence, their expressions, the way no one stepped in to defend them, it all confirmed what the letter had exposed. But then the lawyer adjusted the paper in his hands and continued. And now, he said calmly, I want to speak about someone who expected nothing. That line caught me off guard, because up until that moment, I hadn't thought about myself at all. I wasn't part of the competition. I hadn't been counting visits or measuring effort. I was just there, or at least that's what I thought. I felt a strange tension build in my chest as the lawyer's eyes briefly lifted from the page and landed in my direction. "And that person," he continued, "is my granddaughter." For a second, I didn't move. I genuinely thought I had misunderstood. Me, out of everyone in that room, me, I could feel the shift immediately. The same way the room had turned on my parents just moments earlier, it turned again. This time toward me, dozens of eyes, confused, curious, some even questioning. I glanced at my parents instinctively, and the look on their faces, I'll never forget it. It wasn't just shock, it was disbelief. Like the entire reality they had built over 20 years had just been flipped, and they couldn't process how or why. The lawyer continued reading. "She never came to impress me. She never asked for anything. She never treated me like an obligation or an opportunity." My throat tightened, because those words weren't dramatic, they were simple, and that's what made them real. I watched her sit with me, talk to me, laugh with me, without expectation. In a house full of noise, she was one of the few who brought me peace. I felt my eyes burn slightly, but I didn't look down. I couldn't, not now. Because for the first time that day, this didn't feel like a performance. This felt like something honest, something I didn't even realize had been seen. The lawyer turned the page. "And for that reason," he said, pausing just long enough for the entire room to lean into the moment, "I have decided to leave the majority of my estate to her." Silence. Not the same silence as before. This one was heavier, final, irreversible. I heard someone shift behind me, a quiet gasp from somewhere across the room, but I didn't turn, I didn't move. Because my mind was trying to catch up with what had just been said. The majority of his estate. To me, I wasn't prepared for that. I hadn't imagined it. I hadn't even considered it as a possibility. And maybe that's exactly why it happened. I looked at my parents again, and this time the expressions were different. The shock had settled into something deeper, something harder, resentment. Confusion, and beneath it all, a quiet realization they couldn't escape. They hadn't just lost. They had been replaced, not by someone more strategic, not by someone more persistent, but by someone who didn't play the game at all. And that's what made it hurt the most, because there was nothing they could argue against, no loophole, no misunderstanding, no technicality. Just truth, laid out clearly and witnessed by everyone in that room. The lawyer finished reading, folded the letter, and closed his briefcase. Just like that, no dramatic ending. No drawn-out conclusion, because everything that mattered had already been said. I stood there, still processing, still trying to understand how a lifetime of quiet moments, conversations, laughter, simply being present, had turned into something this significant. And then it hit me. While everyone else had been focused on the outcome, Grandpa had been focused on the intention. While they were measuring time, he was measuring truth. And in the end, truth won. Not loudly, not aggressively, but completely. That day didn't just change my life financially, it changed the way I saw everything. Because I realized something most people never do. You don't have to fight for what's meant for you. You don't have to pretend, manipulate, or wait for the right moment. Because when someone truly sees you, when they understand your heart without you having to prove it, the outcome takes care of itself. And as I stood there, surrounded by a family that suddenly felt very different from the one I walked in with, I knew one thing for sure. This wasn't just an ending. It was the beginning of a truth no one could ever rewrite. If this story shocked you, hit *** like asterisk right now, because sometimes the truth really does come out when you least expect it. Have you ever seen a family torn apart over money or inheritance? Drop your story in the comments. I read every single one, and your experience might help someone else feel less alone. And if you believe that real intentions always get revealed in the end, make sure to subscribe and turn on the notification bell because the next story might hit even closer to home. Trust me, you don't want to miss what's coming next.